And I'm here to tell you the story of a very unlikely adventurer today. So that story starts with a little girl who seemed, for all intents and purposes, to have been born into the right family to follow a path of adventure in life. Her mum was a leader in the Guides and her dad was a leader in the Scouts. And ever since she was just a little baby, she was taken on camps with them when they took their Scouts and Guides off for whatever they were doing. And there's even a photo of her in one of those kind of hiking backpacks being carried around by one of the guides on these camps. So, you know, a great setup, a great start. However, it quickly became very clear that the adventurous path might not be so straightforward for that little girl. As a toddler on these camps, her parents could leave her on a blanket in the middle of the grass whilst they were doing their chant chores, and they knew she wouldn't try to crawl away. Why? Because the minute that she touched grass, she would recoil and begin to cry very, very loudly. And that's not exactly a great start for a life of adventure when most of the outdoors is covered in this stuff. It was a similar situation any time that she went to the beach. If the sand touched her hands or her feet, she'd scream and scream and scream until somebody picked her up. Now, considering you're here to listen to me talk about my experiences and my story, it'll come as no surprise to learn that that little girl was me. Now, I'm autistic and I wasn't diagnosed as autistic until I was 23. So throughout my childhood, the barriers that I was facing to enjoying the outdoors, I had zero understanding of. I had no idea how to overcome them. I couldn't even describe them. I didn't even know what words to use. I wouldn't have been able to explain to you what exactly it was that I was struggling with. I just knew that going outdoors and being active felt bad, and therefore I avoided it. I was much more likely to be found in my bedroom, curled up with a book, probably something by Enid Blyton, having my adventures in the pages of The Famous Five, The Secret Seven, Mallory Towers, or The Faraway Tree. So that's setting the scene. We fast forward now to my early 20s when I got that diagnosis, so I'm 23, and I'm on a journey, quite the journey, to understanding myself. I know that for some people, and for some people that I've spoken to, learning that you're autistic can be incredibly challenging, and I can't pretend that it was an easy ride for me the whole way. However, I can wholeheartedly say that learning that I'm autistic changed my life for the better. And one of the first things that I decided after I got this diagnosis, even beforehand actually, when I was first suspecting that I might be autistic, is I wanted to find out everything that I could about how to make the outdoors more accessible to me. So I looked online, and the more I looked, the more I realised there are very few resources available about how to support autistic people to be more adventurous. There was definitely no one central place to learn about different types of activities and how being autistic might affect our experience of them. So I created one. And writing the book for me was really a vehicle to learn more about myself, to learn about my abilities, and it also connected me with so many other amazing autistic people from all around the world. And it helped me to appreciate that I literally experience the world differently to people who aren't autistic. And to give you a flavour of what that looks like, I'm going to share with you an outdoor activity that I did a couple of years ago, now that I'm an autistic adult who has the vocabulary and the understanding to explain what that felt like for me. So back in the summer of 2021, whilst I was writing the book, we went on a family holiday to South Wales. Now, at the time I was working, so as most working people do, I was hoping for a very peaceful and restful break with the family. And that is absolutely not what my little brother had in mind. And the first day of this trip, he'd booked for us to go coast steering. Now, for any of you who aren't familiar with this delightful seaside activity, coasteering involves clambering along cliff edges, swimming into caves, and throwing yourself off rocky ledges into the frothing waves below. Yeah, not what I had in mind for my peaceful and restful holiday, but given that I was writing a book called The Autistic Guide to Adventure, I could hardly back down from that challenge. And that is how I came to find myself wrestling into a wetsuit at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning when I would much rather have been in bed with my book. Now, I have mixed feelings about wetsuits. It's a bit of a love-hate relationship, and I'll tell you why. A wetsuit offers a lot of compression, a lot of deep pressure, and any autistic people in the room will know that that is the good stuff. That is what we like. You know, you'll find us under a weighted blanket when it's 35 degrees outside because it just feels good. So we like that about wetsuits. However, wetsuits also harbour salt and sand in every nook and cranny. And it doesn't matter how much it was cleaned, once you put it on, you've got salt and sand in all of your nooks and crannies as well. And it's incredibly uncomfortable. So I'm starting off on the back foot. I'm not feeling particularly great about this wetsuit and I'm nervous. I've never been coasteering before. I don't know what the structure is. I don't know what the plan is. And my brain struggles to adapt to new environments and activities when I don't have those things. Thankfully, we had some really understanding guides and they talked us through what the route was going to be, what the plan B was if anything went horrendously wrong, which it did, as you'll find out in a minute. So the autistic community, we talk about sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. You can be both at different times, and that's not even just different times in your life. That can be literally day to day, hour to hour, you can switch between the two. Think of it kind of like the whole extrovert-introvert thing, in the sense that generally you'll lean more towards one than the other, but you can be both at different times. Now, by nature, I am very much a sensory avoider. I minimize sensory inputs to avoid overwhelm wherever possible. And sadly, that's not something that you have much control over whilst you're coasteering. I had the smell and the taste of the salt invading my nose and mouth. There were barnacles on the rocks that were clawing at my skin, even through the wetsuit. Sunlight was glaring on the water into my eyes, and the waves were pounding against my ears. We were nearing the end of the route, and my energy levels were depleting rapidly. So I did what any sensible person would do in this scenario. I had a great big panic attack. Now, I'm in the middle of the sea at this point. The waves are raging around me. I am freaking out. And thankfully, that little brother who thought that this was such a great idea swooped in and saved the day. He had to wrap one arm around me, tow me back to the rock, and then hang on to the side as we waited for the guides to come and rescue me. And they'd clearly dealt with a very panicked coasteering participant before because they were excellent. They helped calm me down really quickly. And one of them let me hold on to his ankle as he swam back to shore, towing my dead weight behind him. So am I ever going to go coasteering again? Absolutely not. Not happening. But jumping off a cliff the height of a house wasn't exactly on my bucket list, and I've ticked it off anyway. That feels pretty cool. Teenage me wouldn't even have had a go at this activity for fear of being the last one, for fear of not being very good, for fear of struggling more than anybody else. So am I glad that I went coasteering? 100%. Ultimately, it did end up being that family bonding activity that my brother had hoped for, just maybe not in the way he was expecting. So I was feeling incredibly proud of myself as I fought my way out of that sand-encrusted wetsuit afterwards. I was finally taking action. I was becoming the main character of my own story, just as I had hoped all those years ago, reading about others' adventures in my childhood bedroom. So that's a little bit about me, a little background about how I came to write this book and why it's so important to me. But what is the book itself? What's in it? So there are 35 different activities in the Autistic Guide to Adventure across 6 different categories. We have creative, finding and identifying, land, snow, water, and wheels. There's also personal anecdotes throughout the book. The co-steering one didn't make it, which is why you got a sneak preview there, but there are plenty of others in there as well. And also interviews with autistic athletes and creatives from across the world. We've got a horse rider in there from New Zealand. We've got a surfer in there from America. It was really exciting to be able to reach out to so many different people in the autistic community and have them become a part of this book. Each section includes why try it, because as we know, if you don't give us a reason to do something, we ain't going to be doing it. Sensory expectations, which I could really have done with before I did co-steering, but that's another matter altogether. How to get started, and different support recommendations for each activity. Also, something that I've found lacking in a lot of the resources that I've accessed, there are illustrations of the kit that are required to do the different activities, and importantly, the materials that that kit is made out of are labelled, because nobody wants to be putting on a shirt or a piece of kit that makes you feel like screaming. So now I am going to give you a taste of what's inside the book by reading one of the chapters. And I should have bookmarked it beforehand, but I didn't, so I'm just going to flick through here. And I've decided to share the mudlarking chapter with you. Most people don't know what mudlarking is. They've never heard of it before they've read the book, so that's one reason why I've chosen it. But also, it was one of the most fun sections to write, so I really hope that you'll enjoy it. Starting with the introduction. Once upon a time in Victorian England, searching for treasures in the mud was a formally recognised profession called mudlarking. It was mostly carried out by children, especially boys, who spent their days looking along the riverbanks for items that could be sold on for profit, providing a stream, see what I did there, of income for their families. Wherever a river was used as a trade route or for recreational travel, there you would find mudlarks earning a living. The objects that they looked for were possessions that people had been losing or discarding in rivers for thousands of years. In Victorian England, mudlarking was a very dangerous profession to be in, however, with a high risk of injury or catching waterborne diseases due to the conditions at the time. In the 21st century, it has become a popular hobby in much the same way as beachcombing. Why should you try it? A great way to think about mudlarking in our modern age is as accessible archaeology. You don't need a fancy qualification or expensive equipment to be able to find a little piece of history. You can simply visit your local river and have a go for yourself. Just check that you don't need a permit first. The mud along the foreshore acts as an anaerobic preservative. This means that when you pick up an interesting object, perhaps from as far back as the Mesolithic period, around 8000 BCE, it will still look very similar to how it was on the day that it was first lost to the river. Mudlarking gives you the chance to hold in your very own hands the possessions of ordinary people like us who lived hundreds or even thousands of years ago. What are the sensory expectations? Well, a key component in the mudlarking experience is going to be your vision. In order to discover these historic objects, you'll want to be looking out for predictable patterns, straight lines, and perfect circles, as those are indicative of a man-made artifact. There will be other sensory inputs too, in the forms of the sounds and smells of the river, as well as the sticky and squelchy mud itself. Most mudlarkers nowadays wear disposable gloves to protect themselves against catching waterborne diseases, so you may also have to deal with the texture of rubber or vinyl against your skin. Getting started. In addition to disposable gloves, there are a few other things that you'll need before you begin mudlarking. These are walking boots or Wellington boots, a bucket or similar receptacle, and a set of knee pads. As I alluded to earlier when I highlighted the importance of vision, mudlarkers start with searching by eye. However, if you get really invested in this activity, you could always introduce tools such as a trowel or sieve to help you unearth the more buried artefacts. Support recommendations. As with beachcombing, it's essential that you're prepared and safe so that you can enjoy the best possible experience. Be aware of the hazards around you. These could include the rising tide if the river is located near the sea, or slippery steps if the river is in a town or city centre. Should you be aware that you're likely to hyper-focus whilst doing this activity, I'd recommend taking a friend or family member with you to help on the lookout for any potential hazards. You're supposed to be rescuing things from the river, not needing to be rescued yourself. On that note, if you are going alone, do remember to always let a parent or guardian know where you're headed. And the little section at the end in here is called Where in the World. Now this is a story that will warm your heart. Back in the summer of 2020, a mudlarker came across a dirt-encrusted 19th century halfpenny whilst using his metal detector along a towpath beside the River Thames in London. He could tell that the coin was hand-engraved with some words, but it wasn't until he got home and was able to clean it that he realised those words were a name and address. After a bit of online sleuthing, he managed to trace the last known address of the grandson of the man whose name was on the coin. He sent him a letter and within a month had a reply. The halfpenny had been used as a dog tag, and with the letter was enclosed a black and white photograph from the 1930s of the man holding his grandson with that very dog stood at his feet. It turned out that the tag had been lost on a walk decades earlier, with nobody ever expecting it would be found again, especially after so much time had passed. I love that story. I think it's so cute. So that's a little bit about mudlarking, and we're getting to the end of the talk now, don't you worry. I just wanted to take this opportunity to share the work of a fellow autistic adventurer who I frustratingly only discovered after the publication of my book. I've come to admire this guy very greatly, and it's fab to be able to share Antonio Rapol's work with a UK audience. So Antonio is a wildlife expert and photographer from Uruguay, and he's the presenter and narrator of Latin American National Geographic documentary series Bichero, which I'm sure I will have butchered, so Antonio, I apologise. Now, he keeps his flock, as he likes to call them, updated regularly on social media with bilingual posts in English and Spanish. And the reason why I admire this fellow autistic adventurer of mine so much is that he is doing pioneering work challenging the monoculture of society that is currently designed for only one type of human being. In his documentary series, he explores animal species and their diversity, demonstrating that this diversity enriches the existence of all creatures on Earth. It's a really important concept, and I hope that one day I'll get to write about it myself and investigate it further. In fact, the University of York has published some research suggesting that neurodiversity, and specifically autistic traits, may well have played a significant role in human evolution. That's quite the statement to make when most of us are made to feel like we're a burden in modern society. It turns out we might be to thank for getting everyone there in the first place. These autistic ways of seeing described in the research, detail, patterns, visual memory, were influential to earliest recordings of time and the first drawings of wild animals. And thinking about this just makes me reflect on how the prehistoric environment might have affected an autistic population at that time. My guess, they didn't have fluorescent lights and loud cars, so perhaps it barely affected them at all. So for this last little bit of the talk, whilst I could leave you with that intriguing thought, I'd like to wrap up by sharing the Autistic and Adventurous Manifesto at the end of the book. So it was really important to me when we made the book that this page was standalone on its own so that people could photocopy it and put it up if they wanted to. Being autistic and adventurous means trying the thing. Walt Disney once said, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." So whatever it is you're dreaming of, just try it. Choose to be courageous and have a go, even when you're not sure you can do it. You'll never know unless you try. Being autistic and adventurous also means asking for support. Remember, asking for support is not a sign of weakness. It's about you setting your sights on a goal and making sure that you have all the right things in place to get there and achieve it. Being autistic and adventurous means respecting your limits. Throughout the book, I've emphasised that if you start feeling overwhelmed or unhappy, it's time to stop whatever it is you're doing. It's okay to come back and try again another day. Your well-being is always the most important thing. And finally, being autistic and adventurous means being an adventurer. Adventure isn't just something you do, it's part of who you are. Choosing to be an adventurer means choosing to see the possibilities for adventure in every aspect of your life. Start looking at the world around you through this lens, and you might just be surprised by what you find there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was just so powerful, so interesting. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Is it okay if we open to the floor and ask some questions? If anybody would like to ask Allie, any questions? Oh yeah, we've got two. Is that okay? Thank you. Would you like to?
Best question ever. So, as I'm sure many of you also find, drinking water is really hard and it's really good for you. And the only way that I can get myself to drink water is to have something that's worth holding. So my water bottle is very spiky so that I can do this. And then I go, oh, this feels nice. Maybe I can do this as well and have a little bit. I would recommend it if you can get your hands on a spiky water bottle.
Would you like one? Possibly not.
I don't like spiky things.
All right. Thank you. Great question. Lady behind you, thank you.
How did your journey been knowing and getting your autistic diagnosis start?
So I was just mentioning this to Kerry before we started the talk. I actually read about this in Women's Health magazine. So I was a subscriber to Women's Health magazine, and there was an article in there in May 2019 written by a lady called Hannah Molesworth. And in this article, she talked about how as a teenager, she had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which is what I was as well. And that as she got older and learnt more about autism, she realised that maybe that wasn't what she should have been diagnosed with at all. And as she started describing the way that she experienced the world, sensory sensitivities, struggling with emotional regulation, social etiquette, unspoken rules, all the rest of it, I was reading this article and I thought, holy cow, that's me. That is definitely me. And so off the back of that, I then went to my GP and I said, I've read this. this sounds like my experience. I'd like an assessment, please.
Can I ask at that point what support came into play? Did having received the diagnosis, was there? Because that's a life change, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Zero support, unfortunately. I think that on the one hand, the prevalence of the autistic community online, whether that's on blogs, Instagram, TikTok, is absolutely fantastic for helping more people to become aware of what being autistic looks like for different kinds of people. It's also led to an increase in people seeking diagnoses and seeking assessment, and it's meant that the NHS just can't cope. They're just so overwhelmed. I actually wanted to get an ADHD diagnosis, so I went through the motions of starting that, and I've been put on a 4-year wait list. So I was very, very lucky when I got my autism diagnosis that it only took 6 months from me going to the doctor to getting the assessment and the answers. But that's very rare. It's not very common. And I think, just to kind of circle back to your question, because the system is so overwhelmed, the focus is on just trying to get as many people through the diagnostic process as possible. And that means that, at least from a government perspective, if you like, there's not a lot of provision, especially for adults, after they get diagnosed.
I mean, the online community sounds like it was amazing, and
100%.
Still is. Would you recommend, are there any charities or anywhere that are really useful for resources too?
So I think for children and young people, I would highly, highly, highly recommend engaging with Ambitious About Autism. They're a UK charity. I don't think they're quite as big as the National Autistic Society, but their focus is on helping autistic young people to achieve their potential. And that's kind of where they channel all of their resources. And I've engaged with them on many levels. I've fundraised for them, and I think that what they do is incredible. So that would be my first port of call.
Great advice. Any other questions, please? Yes, yeah, absolutely.
When you were young, maybe between 10 and something like this, would it have helped you to think if you had peers who you could recognise as being similar to yourself?
I think so.
Trying new things and getting
Yes.
fear of new things.
Definitely. I think that what I have found from being part of the online community now is that we can share those experiences and acknowledge the same interpretations, if you like, of the world and what we're going through, and being able to ask somebody, have you tried doing this? If so, how did it make you feel? What was it that you struggled with? And as we found out today about the spiky water bottle, not every autistic person is the same. So as much as I'm a sensory avoider on most counts, I freaking love this thing. And I take it with me everywhere, and people always ask about it. And that's a nice point of connection, you know, it starts a conversation, and it's a very natural way for me to go, oh yeah, I'm autistic. And so for me, I really need to have these visual triggers to do things that most people remember to do intuitively. So to circle back around to your question, I think that if I'd had that in, let's say, a school environment, or even if it had been an extracurricular environment, a club or something, where there were others like me who were experiencing the world in the same way, but also talking about what that was like, discussing that and trying to explore new ways of overcoming things, I think that would have been really beneficial.
Made me wonder as well whether within schools the kind of adventures that you have instead of certain types of sports during PE lessons.
Oh my goodness, yes. Don't get me started about rounders.
Absolutely. What do you think would adapt well into sort of schools for, for
Yes.
exercise activity, but in an enjoyable way?
So I think something that I'm sure will resonate with many people that I really struggled with at school was team sports. Because not only are you having to face the difficulties of being active, being outside, and all of the barriers that comes with that, you also then have to deal with the social etiquette, the interaction, the understanding of how the dynamics work within a team. And I didn't have that. And it's not something that I'd ever been explicitly taught. So for me, any team sport was immediately meltdown central. And so I think from the perspective of how to include autistic kids in outdoor activities at school, something that we can do side by side but by ourselves is so much more beneficial. And it was really important to me when I wrote the book that the activities I included were things that you can do on your own, and maybe it is in a group context. So for example, archery, please do not just grab a bow and go out to the woods and see what happens, because I don't want to be responsible for that. But even though you're in a club context, even though there are other people there who are doing it with you, you're just focusing on yourself and you're focusing on what you're trying to accomplish. And you can interact with the others that are there if you want to, but you don't have to. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of the activities in the book.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you find a sort of mindfulness in sort of nature when you're outside? You know, I was thinking perhaps in terms of schools and taking that time, sort of sensory gardens and so on. Would that be a way of, you know, young people perhaps in groups being able to do something individually but be in nature? Or do you feel the benefits?
Definitely. I love a good sensory garden because it often incorporates a lot of different aspects that will appeal to different autistic people or different people with sensory sensitivities. And so, you know, the one thing is not going to appeal to everybody, but the fact that you've got all of them there together means that it's a collaborative activity. It's something that you're sharing together while still having that individual engagement. And certainly for me, in the mindfulness kind of perspective, when I'm really getting into an activity in that kind of hyper-focus element, it's when you kind of forget that you're autistic and you forget that you're struggling and you forget that there are things out there that are challenging to you, because in that moment you found the thing that you can do and you found it in the way that works for you. And you just want to chase that feeling so much. I think for me, that's what really drives me to keep trying new activities. And if it doesn't work out, you know, I gave co-steering a go. It did not bring me inner peace and joy. So I will not be doing that again. But for anything that does, like for example, kayaking, I tried kayaking on that holiday as well. And I'd done it a little bit when I was younger, but I realized out there on the water, just me and my boat, absolutely loved it. And so that's something that I try and incorporate where I can, because I know that the minute that I get out there on the water and it's just me and the boat and I'm not sinking, hopefully, that's a whole other story. It's a kind of peace and a kind of contentment with myself that I can't get in any other way.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Thank you.
Yes, is the short answer. I have found that there aren't necessarily nationwide providers, if you like, so people who are doing it in lots of different areas. But I do find when I come to these kind of events and when I speak to people who've come to hear me talk, or if I've gone to hear a talk on a similar topic, I'll meet people who are doing that in their local areas. And so, I mean, I don't mean to point you out, sir, but we were having a little chat earlier because that's exactly what you do. So I'd recommend talking to this lovely gentleman at the front afterwards. But often there will be parents of autistic children who go out of their way to make that provision available, not just for their child, but also for other kids within the community. Off the top of my head, I know that they're quite far away, but Edge Autism in Scotland are doing a fantastic job, and they're people that I have collaborated with previously, who provide excursions and kind of supported adventures for autistic young people. I think autistic young adults specifically, those guys do. So if it's the concept that you're interested in, I'd definitely have a look at those. That was the long answer.
Really useful answer, thank you. And any other questions, please? Oh, we've got two, thank you. Would you like to? Yes, thank you.
Do you play any video games?
Ooh, that is a great question. I've tried, but I have to be honest, they're not for me. I think for me personally, I find the screens too bright and I find them too draining. So when I start playing a video game, I last like 10 minutes and then I have to go outside and look at the stars.
Do you? What's your favourite? Yeah.
I have literally no idea, but I do play a lot of Pokemon and Zelda games.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
I have heard that Zelda is very good. Maybe I should give it a go. I've not tried that one yet.
And I'm sort of imagining that that's where you might get your hyper-focus, is it? When you're just absolutely lost in it. What a precious feeling. Thank you. The lady behind, thank you.
Hi, Ellie. I really love the way you work. It's really personable, and I can really imagine a young individual really taking this, the way that you've written it, really to heart, and really like the way that you guide them through the experience is amazing.
Thank you.
That. And as a primary school teacher, who comes across a lot of children who struggle with those school interactions, I was just wondering if you had any plans of maybe doing an autistic guide to school. Because I just think that there really is, you talk about your experience as an adult, getting support, and, we have children that have their diagnosis and they come into school with that, and it makes no difference to us as professionals. We treat every child with what works for them, but actually this is a book that they could then read and then, do you know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
This is something that, we can use, parents can use. It would be like an amazing resource, especially for those children that are changing schools or going through a tough time, or
Yes, 100%.
on and just,
I think that's a really lovely idea.
guide school.
Yeah, yeah.
Would be amazing as a professional and as an individual.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. That's very, very kind of you. I think that I've found part of writing the book was so that this resource would be available for professionals working in this space specifically. So I have had a few kind of leaders of extracurricular groups and kind of the sort of groups that you were talking about there at the back come forward and say, I've never had access to anything like this, and the fact that I've got like a reference point now that I can go back to and sort of reflect on what my practice is and how I can make it better for autistic kids has been incredibly rewarding. So I might send an email to my publishers. We'll see how we get on. But that's a really nice idea. Thank you.
I was just going to say, it might be
I
worth
was going to say.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of given me goosebumps because I can really imagine that working in the same way that you've spoken to so many different wonderful adventurers in the book, being able to share those experiences to people, advice and experiences in a book, I'm sure would be really, really helpful. And any other questions? Thank you.
Sorry, could you say that? Oh, perfect.
Brilliant. Perhaps better just take one more question. I'm just aware of the time. Have we got any others? Oh, now we've got two. So I think it'd be lovely to have, hear from both of you, if you like. So your hand went up first then.
What adventure would you like to try next?
Oh, that is an amazing question. So I'm actually going to Norway in a couple of weeks and I will be husky sledding for the first time. And I think that's going to be really amazing because I'm a huge dog person. And for those of you who are also dog people, my dog is waiting outside for cuddles and love after the talk if you would be interested. And so I think, as many autistic people find, my connection with animals is a lot stronger than my connection with people. Don't tell my boyfriend that. Sorry, Chris, love you. He's outside with the dog. But so for me, the idea that I'm going to get to go on an adventure with an animal that I know that I connect with, like immediately as soon as I see one is really exciting. So I just hope that I'm not terrible and make them all fall over in the snow. We will see.
That sounds incredible.
That's a good question. I think to be perfectly honest, I think because I'm confident enough to be so open about my needs and my support needs, I've not necessarily found I can't think of any significant negative kind of interactions that I've had, because people have just accepted me at face value, because now I've come on this journey, I've written the book, and I can say, okay, so for this, I'm going to need you to talk me through step by step what we're going to do. Or for this, I'm going to have to probably try on a few different types of kit before we find the one that works for me. I think because I am comfortable talking about that and I don't take it too seriously, I don't necessarily get too kind of hooked up on it. People are more interested in learning and they're more interested in asking questions. And so very fortunately, I've found that in these scenarios, more often than not, it's a very positive interaction, because I've been able to educate people and they've been able to ask questions that maybe they wouldn't have felt comfortable asking if I wasn't open to start with. But I can very well imagine that if I wasn't as confident as I am, and that I went into those environments not feeling that I could ask for what I needed, it would result in some misunderstandings or some miscommunication, or people not necessarily being as supportive as they could be. And that's really why I wrote the book, so that, you know, the support recommendations section is so important, because I think a lot of people go into these activities and they think, I've got no idea what would help me. I know what I find hard, but I don't know how to address that. And so hopefully I've given them the words that they can do that with a bit of my confidence. I put it in the book and then people can take it with them.
I think it's amazing to think that with your book that can get out there to places running those sorts of activities for everybody, and they can begin to become more inclusive, learning from it. And you're due to meet with the journalist, I believe, today, so hopefully you're going to get the word out. Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Well, thank you ever so much. What we have now is some time. Allie's got copies of her books here. If you'd like to come up, in fact, if you had a question and you didn't want to ask in front of everybody, would that be okay as well?
Absolutely,
come
please
up and
do
meet
just
you.
ask me one-to-one if you'd like to.
And I don't know how much the book is actually. It will say over there.
I think it's $14.99. But it's probably worth checking. But I was also just going to mention quickly that whenever I do an event like this, I always ask the people that have come and given their time to hear me speak to sign my book as well. So I'm going to find somewhere, probably on this table over here, to leave my book with some nice coloured pens. And I'd love it if everybody wanted to write a message wherever you want. I'm not precious. People have written it in the middle, they've written it at the front, they've written it at the back. So that would be amazing if you wouldn't mind.
That is lovely. Thank you ever so much, and thank you for coming.